My name is Ronak Patel. I'm the Energy and Climate Change Advisor here at the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. Thanks for joining us this morning for the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory webinar. We just wanted to start by respectfully acknowledging that this presentation is being presented to you from Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. If you are not familiar with the Action Center, we provide funding, technical assistance, and education to support Alberta municipalities in addressing climate change. And the Municipal Climate Change Action Center is a partnership between three organizations, the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, as well as the Government of Alberta. For today's webinar, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the program that this webinar is connected to, which is the Partners for Climate Protection program. Then we'll move into the bulk of today's topic, starting with some basics around GHG inventories. I'll talk about the 4 steps that are involved with creating an inventory, and then just touch a little bit about business as usual forecasting. And then I'm very happy that we're joined today by Amy Fournier from the Town of Canmore, and she'll be providing an overview of what the Town of Canmore has done around GHG inventories. If you have questions, please hold them to the end, or you can type them in the chat box. We'll answer the questions as we go throughout the presentation, or we'll address them at the end if it pertains to the overall topic. So the Partners for Climate Protection program provides a 5-milestone framework to help municipal governments take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The program is a network of over 400 municipalities in the country. Each of these municipalities has committed to taking action on climate change, and it's through the program that they receive access to technical support, guidance, training, tools, and resources. And the program is also working to help leverage networking and peer-to-peer learning between members. This program is a joint initiative between the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or the FCM, as well as ICLEI Canada, and it is the Canadian component of ICLEI's Cities for Climate Protection International Network. The Action Center was proud to be appointed as Regional Climate Advisor for our province back in July last summer. So as I mentioned, the program is a 5-milestone framework. You can see each of the 5 milestones here. Today's topic really is all about milestone 1, creating a baseline emissions inventory and forecast. Starting out, what is a greenhouse gas emissions inventory? Well, basically, an emissions inventory is a list of all the greenhouse gas emissions produced in a defined region within a specific period of time. Greenhouse gases, as we know, are emitted from a wide range of both natural and human activities. One example of an emission source that an inventory could detail could be the emissions that are associated with the amount of electricity used in a year within a rec center facility. Why are greenhouse gas inventories important? Well, the inventory provides us information about the total emissions, as well as the sectors, areas, or actions that are responsible for emissions. So this information is helpful to you as a municipality because it can help assess how much you can mitigate your local emissions. It can also impact any future actions you may have. It creates a way of tracking emissions, energy consumption, energy costs, and all that information provides you, will hopefully provide you a way to impact your policies and implementation that can increase your environmental awareness, while also providing a baseline to which progress on climate mitigation can be measured against. There's a lot of different types of inventory, but in the PCP program, we break it down into 2 different scales. So we have the corporate inventory. This could include emissions that are associated with municipal operations or services. And then on the flip side are community inventories. This is a larger scale, and that would include emissions from key sectors and activities that are within your community or municipality as a whole. So really, in this diagram, you can see that the inventory, the corporate inventory, is just a subsector of the community inventory. In most cases, this corporate inventory will fall entirely within the community inventory. On occasion, we might see some emissions that are attributed to the corporate side that won't be in the community side. An example of this could be if there's waste generated by your corporate inventory, your municipal operations, and that's managed outside of your geographical boundary. That could be some emissions that fall outside of that sphere. Participants in the PCP program are encouraged to use the PCP protocol. The protocol is a guideline for developing inventories. It's important to have a protocol. It serves as a guideline, like I mentioned, but it creates a reliable, accurate, and generally accepted way to measure emissions for all the participants. In the protocol, 5 key areas are identified for corporate inventories. So you see these 5 areas here. That includes emission sources from municipally owned or operated buildings, buildings or facilities. It also includes municipal fleet vehicles, any local street signs or traffic signals, water and wastewater facilities that you may operate and maintain, as well as emissions from solid waste. Similarly, to complement the PCP protocol, the community GHG inventories must include emissions from the following 5 activity sectors. This includes residential buildings, institutional or commercial buildings, industrial buildings, as well as transportation and community solid waste. You do have an option to include other areas that may have significant emission sources. This could include agriculture if you're a agricultural municipality. It might include non-road transportation. It might include wastewater. But really, those 5 activity sectors are what must be included to comply with the PCP protocol. So we took the idea of creating an inventory, and it was broken down into 4 steps. The first step really is to define the boundary for which the emissions we are measuring. This boundary is not just geographical; it could be physical, organizational, or jurisdictional. But the PCP protocol gives us some guidelines on what to include for both corporate and community. So in the case for municipalities at the corporate level, the boundary is really just defined by whatever you have in your operational control. This is a little bit tricky because the roles and responsibilities of local government will vary from municipality to municipality, but that's why this is the first step in what we need to define. For community level actions, the boundary is usually defined in the PCP program just by your jurisdictional or geographical boundary of your municipality. The PCP protocol is here to help outline what boundaries are appropriate for your inventory. Once we have the boundaries in place, we can talk about selecting an inventory year. We want to try and select a base year that is fairly current, and we want to have reliable and complete data. Really, this is important at this step because this base year it will be in place to help measure future reductions against. Once again, this will vary from municipality to municipality, but we do want to focus on those 3 criteria being current, complete, and reliable. You may want to use a recognized base year that's aligned with other jurisdictions. There may be some municipalities nearby you that have certain base years already set, or you might want to use provincial or federal alignments. The benefit here is that it can increase your ability to access data, as well as the ability to compare targets and progress moving forward. And step 3 is all about data collection. So when it comes to collecting information to use, it's important to kind of understand or remember that the inventory will include data on things such as energy use. So this can include like electricity or the consumption of fossil fuels. The inventory will include data on transportation. So things like vehicle kilometers traveled, the fleet composition, types of fuel will all be included. We also want to look at waste, so waste composition, the volumes, the different disposal methods. All of these different types of data will be needed. Where possible, we want to try and gather real data. Real data means really anything that is an actual measure of consumption. This kind of information is usually determined by reading some kind of local or individual meter, fuel input points, or you can look at purchase receipts, fuel receipts, purchase records, things like that. If we don't have access to the real data, we can use other methods of data collection. So this could include like surveys or models. And then in extreme cases where we don't have any data really available to us at the local level, we can use regional or national data and kind of scale it down based on capita, like population area or other important indicators. Yeah, I just wanted to one last point on this step is that data collection really is just a trade-off. We want to try and be as accurate as possible, but we also want to not spend too much time doing the collection. The inventory definitely is an important aspect of climate mitigation, but the real work is in actually doing the mitigation. So we don't want to spend too much time building an inventory. All right, so step four, the last step here of building an inventory is quantifying the emissions. So this step is the most complicated aspect of it. It can be overwhelming, but there is a very basic premise. It's quite straightforward if we think about it in terms of just converting the data from activity data into emissions. So there's just a little sweet, short little formula stated here. Our greenhouse gas emissions are measured by multiplying the activity level or rate by its respective emissions factor. So the activity, like I mentioned, is just how much are we consuming. That could be like fuel use, for example, and an emissions factor. Well, it's a representation. It represents the rates or quantity of greenhouse gas emissions that are released of, as a result of a specific activity. So in the PCP program, we recommend using emission factors from Environment and Climate Change Canada's National Inventory Report. I've linked it here in the PowerPoint, so you should be able to access that pretty quickly. What this report does is that it provides emission factors that are specific to Canada and in some cases to each province. And they also update it annually. So it's a great resource to use when we're trying to simply convert activity into emissions. So just an example to kind of help illustrate how to use this kind of translation. So if our example is we're trying to analyze our emissions from transportation in the municipal fleets, and we know that we've consumed 500 liters of diesel in a 1 year period, we can quickly use that formula. The activity data is our 500 liters in that year. And then our emissions factor we can get from the inventory report. So I pulled that number from the report here. It's 0.002757 tons per liter. So that quickly gives us an estimation of what the emissions can look like. So 1.379 tons of CO2 equivalent in this case. So those are the 4 steps involved with creating an inventory. They're very basic steps that kind of help you break down the process of doing the inventory. One last aspect of the inventory is to do something called a business as usual forecast. What this does is that it shows us what will happen to emissions if there is no intervention or any climate mitigation initiatives. So basically, this is what your future inventory would look like if we assumed no further action was taken to limit emissions. This projection is important because it allows municipalities to see what climate change actions could achieve in comparison to that normal or business as usual forecast. And this is really important in the later steps of emission reduction target setting and creating a climate action plan. Basically, comparing various actions to this business as usual profile will help clarify your impact that you may have, that their impact may have on your emissions. And it also can help you prioritize which actions to take first. So I just pulled this example to help kind of illustrate what it looks like. This is a business as usual forecast for the country as a whole. The graph includes 2 lines showing projection emissions from 2005 to up to 2030. The 2 lines represent 2 of the most recent projections. So one line is projections based on data from December 2016, and then the other line is the red line is what the 2015 numbers showed us. And then I also included this graph because you can also see the gap that exists between Canada's target for greenhouse gas emissions. That's at 30% below 2005 levels in the orange dots. So for our program members that are joining us today that are looking to complete milestone 1, you do have a handful of requirements to submit to the program. So we want to see a summary of your inventory. We want to know about your data sources and what was used to build the inventory. And we want to know if there's any assumptions or omissions or things you left out to help frame your inventory, as well as that business as usual forecast. So I just wanted to highlight the PCP tool as a way to help you in your inventory building. So this is just a screen grab of what it looks like, but basically it's a web-based inventory tool. It's there to support our members in measuring and managing their emissions. So you can enter all of your data into this program, and it'll allow you to see what the emissions look like for both corporate and community. It's free for PCP members. There was a new version that was released last year in February. So information here is up to date, and it provides us a way to not only enter data, but to also see what is being put out in a consistent manner. And I believe Amy will touch a little bit more about how Canmore used the PCP tool in their inventory work as well. Yeah, so with that said, I will pass it over to Amy from Canmore, and thanks for joining us today, Amy, and presenting a little bit more about what Canmore is doing.
Thanks, Ronnie. Happy to be here today and sharing a little bit about our experience. First of all, just wanted to quickly say that I hope everybody out there is doing okay during this tough and challenging time. And for my presentation, I'll go through a little bit of background about Canmore and where we're at with our climate work, talk about my experience using the PCP tool, touch on how the inventory has been really useful in moving forward on our climate work. And lastly, I'll touch on some of the challenges and lessons learned for me. Most of you, I think, on this call are from Alberta, so I believe you are familiar with, where Canmore is. But for anybody from afar, Canmore is a small town. We're about 14,000 permanent residents. We're outside of Banff National Park, so we're right in the Rockies, and we're about an hour west of Calgary. Tourism and outdoor recreation is our main economy. From a climate perspective, we are currently on milestone 4 of the PCP program in implementing local action plans. In December of 2018, our council adopted our climate action plan that we're currently working on and adopted 2030 and 2050 targets that you see up on this slide here. Prior to that, the document that was really guiding our climate work was our environmental sustainability action plan. So it was more of a holistic document, but it had a specific chapter on climate and energy. All of this predates me. I came to Canmore and started working for the town through the FCM, Municipalities for Climate Innovation program, and the 2-year staff grant funding that program provides. So I would assume that some of you on this call are also part of that program. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary with the town of Canmore, all by myself, alone in my cold basement a couple of weeks ago, and have another year left to kind of complete my work. And my main role is to implement the climate action plan. When the consultants who did our action plan and really put that together for us, when they did that, they developed our greenhouse gas inventory baseline using 2015 as the baseline year. That I think Ron touched on this a little bit in his part, but there was a desire to use an earlier year, perhaps 2005, to align with the federal targets in the federal baseline, but we just didn't have data available to be able to do that. And so 2015 was a year where we could have reliable data. So our targets for 2030 and 2050 relate to that 2015 baseline year. One of the work plan items for my role and the funding that we have from FCM was to do an update to the inventory for 2018. And so I worked on that last year, and it's complete, and I had the opportunity to present to our council in February. Our council is set up so that once a month there is a meeting where reports are provided as information only, and that was a great opportunity to share the inventory with them and talk about some of the complexities of greenhouse gas accounting and talk about some of our greenhouse gas sources. So here's it's a really handy graphic. It's available from the C40 Cities website that talks about inventory scopes. Ronak had talked about the PCP protocol. There is another one called the GPC protocol, and I'll define that acronym on the next slide. But that's what we are trying to align our inventory with. The ones in red circles are the ones that are covered in our inventory. As Canmore is a small town, we don't really have agriculture. We don't have large industries as well. We also decided to stay at the basic reporting level and just to focus on these scopes and not tackle, for example, out of boundary transportation. The data sources that were really important for my work in doing this were these on this slide here. So local data I obtained from ATCO and Fortis gave me our energy consumption data for our community. I got fuel sales data from Kent Industries. That was actually purchased data. For us, it cost $150 to get all of the fuel volumes sold from the gas stations in Canmore. From Kent, I don't know if it is a sliding scale, if larger cities would have to pay more, but that was kind of an easy process for us to get that data from them. Vehicle kilometers traveled. We don't have great sources for that. Some cities have transportation panels or survey data that they can get. We don't have that. We don't have traffic counters. So vehicle kilometers traveled had to be estimated. And Ron touched on this as well, that you can use regional or provincial data, and that's what we had to do for vehicle kilometers traveled. So some sources for that was the Alberta Registry, getting number of motor vehicles registered to Canmore addresses, and they were really helpful in providing that, as well as the NRCan energy use database and all the tables there. So if anybody's not familiar with those tables, they're very helpful. They break down energy use and greenhouse gases by sector at a provincial level. The National Inventory Report, one I've talked about already. This is the one pictured here on this slide. That has all of the emission factors in it, and the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventories, which is why it has a nice, easy acronym, because it's a mouthful. So that was the protocol. So both of these last two things, the inventory report and the GPC, if you're using the PCP tool, that is part of the back end of that, so you don't need to worry about those as much. So the global protocol is just another, the GPC and the PCP are related. The GPC is slightly more stringent than the PCP protocol. Hopefully that all makes sense as I'm throwing numbers at you. So getting into the experience a little bit. When it came down to updating our 2018 inventory, I gave it a little name called Frowning at Spreadsheets, because that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. We had a decision to make in doing this inventory of how to do it. In 2018, when our consultants put together our climate action plan and developed our baseline, they had put together kind of a spreadsheet that they did manually. So they figured out our baseline on their own and gave us the spreadsheet that they had done to do that. So it had all the calculations built into it. It had all the emission factors built into it. And the idea was that we could, from going forward, use that same tool that they had developed and enter our data and figure out our future inventories that way. And then there's the PCP tool. So I was interested in exploring both. And in the end, I ended up going with the PCP tool, and that is my recommendation to the town of Canmore moving forward, is to continue to use the PCP tool for our inventories. The reason why is, or there's a few reasons why. One, all those coefficients and emission factors from the National Inventory Report, those change. So when Canada submits that to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, those get updated. And I spent a lot of time, and this is where the frowning at spreadsheets comes in, going back and forth, trying to make sure that I had the right information and that the emission factors hadn't been updated since the consultants put together our baseline. For the PCP tool, that's all done for you in the back end by ICLEI staff. And there's also, as anybody can attest to who's worked with big spreadsheets with lots of calculations built in, there's chance of human error. And as you know, likely people have experienced this as well, you can be out a decimal place and it drastically impacts your results. So I felt that the kind of QA and QC done by ICLEI in the back, because they're constantly updating this tool, and with the number of people using the tool, that the chances of human error are a lot less with that. For me, I found the PCP tool a lot more user-friendly and simpler to use than the spreadsheet that was built for us by the consultant. So As much as I would like the town of Canmore to think that I'm amazing and completely indispensable, and they have to keep me forever, even after the FCM funding is gone next year, I don't know if that'll happen, especially right now with COVID. So it's very likely that another staff person may have to do the next inventory, and for them, it will be simpler to use that PCP tool. There's also the issue of support. I found that Akeley was really great in being available for questions and guidance when I needed it. The consultants, on the other hand, we had finished our work with them and we had the tool, but it wasn't really appropriate for me to be going back to them over and over to ask them little niggling questions. So that's the second reason why I was recommending the PCP tool moving forward. There are some things that still need to happen. It's definitely not something that you can sit down and, get your inventory done in a day or two. There's some additional information that's needed and some work that still needs to be done. And I have some screenshots and I'll go through those in the next couple slides just to illustrate what I'm talking about there. For wastewater treatment, what was in the tool when I had used it was just for rural areas with septic fields. And because we have a different system, we don't have that. So I had to calculate that separately using the GPC guidance document and following their calculations. And then I had to enter that in manually into the inventory tool. I was also limited in the categories and displays that are available in the tool. And for my reporting to council, I wanted to show it in slightly different ways. So I just had to take the data out and put it into Excel and develop the charts the way I wanted to show them. But these are just some of the little things that had come up that I wanted to flag for people who are considering using it. This is a screenshot. So this is a screenshot of the waste page. So as you're entering the data, you choose which kind of sector you want to input and go from there. So in the waste, I had entered my tonnage of solid waste that we had landfilled in the year. And then this area, when I came to it, was blank. And that was left for me to input. So we actually had a waste audit done a few years ago on our waste. So I knew some of the general percentages, but just for example, in this case, we had separated it out in different ways and we had different categories, and I didn't have textiles separated out. So what I did is I found some information from an IPCC report that had averages based on North America. So I was able to fill this in with that data. And these composition information is important and it can impact the actual tonnage results that we got at the end of the day. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing that right. So that was another thing that ICLEI was available to guide on and let me know that this was an appropriate way to do that. Ronick touched on this as well. It's talking about the assumptions that you make and the methodology and where you got your data from. And this is a great section for this. You can put everything in that there. And also for if another staff person does the next inventory, they can pull up this one and see where I got all my information and my assumptions that I made, and it's all right there. This is another page within it. So this is where I would enter my transportation information. So for us, we used fuel sales data. I put in my fuel sales information that I got from Kent Industries. Propane had to be estimated because Kent doesn't provide propane data. So I extrapolated that from provincial data from the NRCan tables. But some extra work had to be done down here with the percentages. That again was another support from ICLEI, who directed me again to the NRCan tables, and I used the provincial averages to fill out these percentage of fuel type used by each vehicle. Some of the challenges that I had when I was doing our inventory, the first one was that ATCO and Fortis, who gave me my natural gas and electricity data, only could do so on an entire community basis. The PCP protocol, the GPCU protocol, all require us to split that out between commercial, institutional, industrial, if appropriate, and residential. And so I didn't have that. I wasn't sure how to do that. And I got a bit stuck there. In the end, what I ended up doing was just taking the provincial split for all of Alberta between commercial and residential and applying that to Canmore's data and then checking that against our square footage building data that we have from our tax roll, and it did align. So that's what we went with. And that's another one of those kind of where you have to estimate a little bit. Transportation emissions were the bane of my existence for a while there. It was difficult. I already alluded that we don't have great local data. The fuel sales data we did have, and that was easy to get and simple to use. But the one caveat with that is that for us, and this probably wouldn't apply for other cities, especially bigger cities, is that gas is really expensive in Canmore. It's more expensive than the little hamlet just east of us by 7 minutes. And it's definitely a lot more expensive than it is in Calgary. So many people in Canmore gas up outside of our city, so we weren't sure if we were capturing that, everybody's fuel use. The other issues that we had, the vehicle kilometers traveled was the other option that we could use, but we have really uncertain population data. This again might not be the case wherever listeners may be, but we have a big influx of seasonal workers and people living in friends' basements for 6 months of the year. We have a large portion of our town is second homeowners. There's about 3,000 people who have a second home in Canmore, and some of them live in England, and they come to Canmore for 2 weeks a year or 4 weeks a year and then are not here for the rest of the time, whereas others live in Calgary and come here every weekend. So it was difficult to try to model or ascribe a certain number of vehicle kilometers traveled to those folks. And lastly, we have a huge influx of tourism, especially in the summer. So that was some of the limiting factors of trying the vehicle kilometers traveled approach. And being uncomfortable, with that information on all that uncertainty. So we did go with fuel sales in the end. The thing that tipped the scales in that favor is I actually tried both methods and played with the numbers a little bit and found that the fuel sales resulted in a higher number of greenhouse gases. So I thought it would be more prudent to err on the higher number as opposed to the lower number. Here's our actual inventory. Here's my baby. Here it all is. So this has been really valuable to us as a tool for conversation, both with council and other staff, as well as the community for a few reasons. One is that there seemed to be a perception that waste contributes more to climate change than it does, just because waste is very tangible. There's a lot of conversation about single-use plastics, for example. And so this has been valuable to show that waste, while important, and especially for us, and food waste collection is one of our big initiatives that we're working on. It is important, but buildings and transportation contribute much more in terms of GHGs than waste does. And I have been trying to show the message that we need to really align our resources and level of effort in terms of our biggest sources of GHGs. The other way it's been valuable is that we are doing a lot of great work corporately. So here's our corporate inventory compared to our community inventory. And we have control over those emissions, and we have control over our own buildings and been doing great energy. Our facilities team does great energy efficiency work. They've been trying to maximize our solar on our rooftops. But this really shows that even if we went net zero tomorrow on our corporate inventory, we wouldn't actually be making a big dent in terms of achieving the 2030 target or the 2050 target. And we need to be focusing on, the policy levers and different things that we can do in the community. This is a graph of our corporate inventory. And this has also been really valuable in showing what the main contributors are. So I don't think before I did this work and we did this work that there was a clear understanding of just how much 3 buildings contribute to our overall GHG footprint. And when you factor in the wastewater infrastructure, the pump and lift stations, like 3/4 of our emissions come from wastewater treatment and water treatment, as well as our 2 rec centers. And so that's been a really great conversation starter with staff and council of how we need to really focus on these buildings. Another one for this is corporate, again, is the huge amount of impact that electricity has on our GHG footprint. and just framing the conversation of how important the initiatives to tackle electricity consumption really are in going forward, and how we won't meet our corporate targets unless we really focus on electricity. So that's been some of the value of doing the inventory work. But I also want to just flag that there's some things and some limitations with the GHG inventory for us, and that they're really important, but they're not the only tool. And if we really need to be considering other factors and reporting on other things at the same time. So for us, because of the lack of confidence in our transportation numbers, if we're reporting out that we've reduced emissions by 2%, which is kind of what happened from 2015 to 2018, that has to be said with the caveat of that there is some uncertainty with the transportation numbers. So before we start, bragging about how great we're doing and that we're reducing emissions, that we need to hold back a little bit on that and admit that that's due to transportation, and we're not exactly sure that that is completely the case. The one danger too with the GHG inventories too is that some of the trends of the smaller contributors can be hidden because, say, buildings and transportation dwarf the inventory. So there may be something going on in the waste or wastewater sector that could be hidden if you're only looking at emissions. There's other contributing factors that are beyond the control of a municipality. For us, our actual building energy use in the community increased, but our GHG emissions were holding steady. And this was because the carbon intensity of our electricity grid in Alberta changed and decreased a small amount between 2015 and 2018. So that impacted our final results. Conversely, weather, you could be doing great work on energy efficiency and have a particularly cold year, and then you won't be able to see the results of that work. And for us, 2018 from June to March was colder, and we actually had a significant increase in natural gas consumption in the community because of that cold snap during those months. And of course, acknowledging that the inventory, well, an important tool and able to measure over time and measure and compare to other cities, it does miss out a few aspects. So our actual footprint will always be bigger than what we indicate by an inventory. So we don't count upstream emissions. We don't count emissions from food and food choices. We don't count emissions related to stuff, consumer goods and services, and embodied carbon as well is not included. It's only operational energy that we're looking at when we're looking at building energy. We also have left out air travel. So all of the travel from tourism of people coming to visit Canmore, as well as residents who are going to Calgary International Airport and hopping on planes to go elsewhere, does not get included in our inventory. To mitigate some of these limitations in our report to council, as well as just moving forward, we included all of the input data alongside of the inventory, just to show some of the trends that were happening behind the scenes. So on the left of this slide is all the data that went into the inventory, and just being transparent about what was kind of happening behind the scenes. And then on the right is what we're using as we call proxy data. And this data helps complete the picture where maybe the inventory might be lacking a little bit, especially in terms of transportation. Well, we're estimating based on fuel sales. What we do know for sure is are some of these trends and numbers. So we can measure motor vehicle registrations, and we know that information from the registry. We know we can look at trends that are happening with electric vehicles and our own transit ridership. In future years, we're going to be able to have more data on our active transportation networks and whatnot. So this is helpful to us to still report out and help complete the picture as we go forward. This also, we are not planning on doing another inventory until 2021. We'd like to align with the next Canadian census when we do our full inventory. But in the meantime, in the interim years, we can share all of this data. It's a lot easier to get. It doesn't require the same amount of work as the greenhouse gas inventory. So this is what we'll report on until 2021. So some of what I learned from the experience of doing this inventory is to ask for help when needed. There was a couple instances definitely where I was stuck, and different folks helped out with that. So one was the PCP Hub. So hopefully most of you are all on the PCP Hub. It's a great resource and a great forum with all sorts of municipal and other practitioners on there. Just as an example, how I ended up dealing with our building energy split between commercial and institutional and residential, that was a suggestion from one of the Hub members. I kind of put my challenge out there and people came up with some different responses. So that really enabled me to move forward. ICLEI, as I mentioned, was great with the questions, and even sometimes I would check in with them just to make sure I was doing it the right way with some of my assumptions, and they were available and really responded in a timely manner. And I also had, I don't know if they're out there today, but Aaron from Red Deer and Sherry from Okotoks, my fellow staff grantees, really were my go-tos for help with this. So I had kind of an informal network where I could bounce things off of. The last one, and Ronak touched on this as well, was just the kind of effort versus impact. I'm trying to share this with council as well, is that we really, really need to balance. Keep in mind that we want to have enough information to make good decisions, but not to go too deep down rabbit holes. And I did in this work. I kind of spent probably more time than I needed to on a few things, trying to, all for the sake of a few tons, of trying to figure out, why numbers might not have aligned and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it doesn't actually impact the outcome and the decisions that we're going to make. And we really need to put our resources into the mitigation actions. So just achieving that balance is something that will be important for me and for future staff going forward. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening. We're going to, I think Ronek's going to facilitate any questions that may be out there.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That was great. I really enjoyed talking about how we can use the inventory as a tool, but it really is that it's just a tool, and it helps us make decisions. But that's the important aspect: is how do we make those decisions? Yeah, so I'll invite folks to input their questions into the chat. I see there were a handful of questions about the slides being shared afterwards. So yeah, we're happy to share the slides. Amy, if you're okay with sharing your side of the slides too, we're happy to circulate that shortly.
Yeah. Happy to share the slides.
Perfect. Yeah, there's one more question here, and Amy, I think it's for you. This person would like to go a little bit further into the Alberta registry. The question is the information on the vehicle registry by municipalities available online? So I guess just looking for a little bit more information on that data.
For sure. Yes and no. When I was going through the registry data, the bigger cities were available, but because we're a smaller town, I had to contact them and request it specifically. So it depends, I guess, who you are when you're searching for that data. But I also found the staff there really helpful, and they provided additional information. And I was also looking for a specific breakout of vehicle type, for example, because I was curious about electric vehicles and the trends there. So that data is available for asking if you need to go kind of on a more refined level than what is available.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe we'll wait just a little bit to see if there are some questions. Guess I can take some of this time to just maybe quickly talk about some of our other webinars upcoming. So we have a handful of webinars scheduled with some great guests joining us. We have one next week on Earth Day, actually, April 22nd. The webinar is Understanding Community Generation. So you can join us as well as the Pembina Institute to learn more about community generation and how it diversifies energy sources and reduces costs. We also have one coming up next month in May on the 26th. This webinar is on how to improve energy efficiency in recreation facilities. You'll learn how to help your rec facilities reduce on energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. We'll be joined by the City of Leduc for that one. And yeah, if you have more questions about the PCP program, feel free to contact me. You can see my contact info up there. I'm sure Amy loves to talk more about her work in Canmore, and you can contact her as well. And yeah, if there aren't any more questions, I think we'll close the webinar for today, but do get in touch if you do have any follow-up questions that you may think of over the weekend. I just wanted to thank Amy one more time for her joining us today and presenting on Canmore and the great work that you're doing.
Thanks. It was fun to be part of it.
Awesome. Oh, I do see a comment, so maybe we'll take this before we go. All right, a chart like the community GHG inventory would help make a stronger, clear case for my firm to build more sustainably in the commercial sector. Yeah, for sure. That community data is very valuable, not only to the municipalities that compile them, but to the folks that do some of the work. Um, I'd encourage firms to partner with your municipality and learn what you can do together. For us municipalities, engaging stakeholders in that way is a huge aspect of doing some of this work. So thanks for that. Thanks for the comments. Perfect. So I think we'll leave it at that. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Please visit mccac.ca if you have more questions or want to learn more about our events. Thanks again, Amy, and take care, everyone.